guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we will take a look at some new revenge content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, "My brother kept finding scraps of food next to his mailbox that kept stray cats in his yard. Found out one night who was doing it. My brother lives in a fairly mixed neighborhood. At one end of the street, the houses are nice, lawns are manicured, and everything is taken care of pretty well. Where the other end of the street is pretty shitty. Houses are lived in without power, no one cares about their yards. When he moved in, the house was in decent shape, but the yard and empty lot that sat next to the house on the same property were full of trash, debris, and stray cats. After a lot of hard work, the house and lawn looked like they belong on the nice end of the street, and most of the stray cats had been taken to no-kill shelters. But some would still hang around his house even though he wasn't feeding them. He figured if he didn't feed them, they'd find somewhere else to live. One day he notices some food scraps next to his mailbox that some of the cats are eating. Over the next couple of weeks, he continues to find it there but doesn't know who is putting it there. One night he decides to stay up all night to see if he can catch who is doing it. He sees one of his neighbors from the nice end of the street, the guy with the perfect lawn, perfect garden, perfect landscaping, dumping food at his mailbox. My brother goes out to confront him and the guy just walks away and goes into his house. My brother ran back to his house and went to the fridge, found any food he didn't want and went to the cupboard to search out any expired cans. Turns out he had some cans of tuna and anchovies he didn't want any more either. He makes a mixture of all of this disgusting crap and takes it over to the neighbor's house. He dumped all of it in the guy's yard, driveway, and garden. The guy never put food scraps in my brother's yard ever again. The reason my brother was so quick to do this was he had previously had his truck broken into. Someone smashed the window with a whiskey bottle, his house was egged, and TP was thrown in the tree. He was fed up with people targeting that house. And from what we know, some pretty shady people used to live there. We guess the neighbors all thought that the people still lived there or something and decided to take their stupidity out on my brother. Next one is titled, "Run over another snowman, jackass, I can build these all day." 12 years ago, when I was in 10th grade, my sister, who was 8 at the time, built a giant snowman after an unusually heavy Pennsylvania snow. She spent all day on this thing, and it was actually pretty impressive. The town I'm from is actually a borough, and it only has something like 7,000 people who live there, meaning high school classes were small and relatively tight-knit. There was one particular kid, who I'll call Scotty, who drove me up the ducking wall. He never did anything to me personally, but he just had a massively annoying way about him. To make matters worse, it seemed as if I had way too many classes with him to be statistically possible. One of Scotty's irritating behaviors is that he drove a loud, redneck-ish John Deere green truck. It was obnoxious as hell, and important to the story later, had a huge brush guard on the front of it. Well, on the evening after she built her snowy Sentinel, I heard the sound of Scotty's truck making its way down the street from inside our living room. Then I heard the PFFT of someone running over a snowman laughing. Unfortunately for my sister, she had built it close to the road and too easily within the range of this semi-guided a-hole. She was rather upset to see her day's work splattered all over the street. Something needed to be done about this. So the next morning, I woke up early and began building another snowman. It was glorious. I made the classic, free-section, scarf-wearing, sticks for arms and vegetables for a face snowman. This new snowman's cheery countenance betrayed a grim and dark secret, however. Frosty was built on top of a fire hydrant at the corner of our yard where there was no curve. For a good 2 days I dreamt of Scotty wrapping his stupid truck around my masterpiece out in the yard. But no dice. I didn't see him at all anywhere around town, so I thought I was out of luck. Then on the evening of the 4th day, I heard it. My family was eating dinner, and I heard the low grumble of Fate's motors kicking from gear to gear. Would they find themselves abruptly halted in about 10 seconds? It all depends on you, Scotty boy. So I start chewing my food really fast because, knowing the idiot, I knew what was happening next. The final acceleration sounded off like a chaotic crescendo as he plowed straight into not through the snowman with the deafening crunch of twisting metal. My family ran outside, and it took everything I had to not laugh before I got out there. There stood Scotty, dazed and bewildered and caught off guard by a battle that he lost before he realized it had begun. Next one is titled, I made my mom believe she had no talent at her hobby. A little bit of backstory to set up the main account of my best and most petty revenge. I grew up in a pretty strict Catholic family. My mom worked full-time and her only hobby outside of work and mom duties was gardening. We live in Canada, and during the fall and winter she grew all sorts of tropical plants in the house to maintain her hobby. Anyways, now the tale of my revenge. One day in grade 3 I was busted for peeing in the schoolyard swamp. It's not like we had an actual swamp or anything. The swamp was the name given to the puddle underneath the giant tire swing that we play on and around during recess. The game we would play was called King of the Swamp. The point of the game can be reduced to one or two facts. It involved trying to push a kid into a puddle and get them wet. And it involved having all the kids playing the game pee into the puddle beforehand, to make sure there was an appropriate risk factor for a schoolyard game created by nose-picking little grade 3 kids. As it so happened, it was my turn to be the King of the Swamp. In order to become the bona fide king, I would need to accomplish what we would call a feat of strength. With a running start, I had to jump from the edge of the puddle into or onto the tire swing, which was around 3 or so feet into the puddle, without falling in or touching the puddle. I must have eaten my Cheerios that morning, because I landed the perfect jump onto the top of the tire swing and became king. The other rules of the game were designed solely for the amusement of the observer they were. Once you became king, you had to start swinging the tire swing from side to side so others around the edge of the puddle could attempt to throw you down into the puddle. This was by far the most dangerous part of the game because being king meant everyone who tried to take you down off the tire swing did so with the sole intention of making sure you went home smelling like an old worn-down urinal cake. Of course, being a king had its privileges, and one of them was that if someone tried to take you down, you could hold them and try and pull them to the puddle, effectively knocking them out of the game, but more importantly covering them with stinky piss water. So, as we got on with the game, the principal of my elementary school decided to come walking by, having watched me pee into the puddle. I should mention at this point that the season was changing fall to winter, and there was slight ice and frost on the ground. This made the game way better to be king also, because it meant the poor sap who tried to drag you off the tire swing usually ended up taking a bath. So as the principal, Mr. Suderman, walks by the tire's wing, he sees me and this kid grappling for rights to the kingdom. In about 3 strides, he made it over to the tire swing and started demanding that we cease our game immediately. We had stopped our grappling, still holding one another in a formidable fashion, while humbly listening to his demands, when his leg jostled slightly. We watched Mr. Suderman's leg slide out from under him while he attempted to regain his balance upon his other leg, which at the periphery of the puddle was also losing its traction on terra firma. Gravity did the rest, and the mass known as Mr. Suderman slowly came to rest at the center of a very deep puddle. I peered over the side of the tire swing, helpless as the kid had let go of me and ran with the rest of the other kids. I knew I was going to pay for this. I got grounded for 2 weeks. No TV, no playing with friends, no toys. I tried to reason with my mom by telling her that it was no fault of mine that the principal had ended up in the puddle, but I suppose Mr. Suderman wanted to save some semblance of being a grown-up, and punishing a child is a fine way to highlight it. My mother would have none of my reason. Suffice to say that I was 3 days into my grounding when the proverbial camel's back was broken by straw. I have 2 sisters, and my mother in her infinite wisdom presumed she could teach me my lesson by using a carrot instead of a stick, except the carrot was for my 2 other sisters. Every night for the next 5 nights my sisters were given dessert, while it was withheld from me. 3 days into an 8-day grounding. Dessert is like prison cigarettes. That stuff is valuable and can keep you from becoming somebody's witch. I was determined to strike back at my mother, and I did so at the one thing she loved above all other things, well, in terms of hobbies. This one expensive African vine plant that she had. For the next month, every day I would pour a small cup of ammonia into the plant's potter, watching frantically as my mom tried to figure out why she couldn't keep the thing alive. The whole time I knew why, because unlike Brondo, ammonia is not a thirst mutilator that plants crave. It ended up dying, and in the processes, I made my mom feel like a crappy gardener. Next one is titled, One from My Dad's Navy Days. A tiny amount of background. My dad was one of the few enlisted men who had anything beyond a high school education on his ship, and because he also liked to read, he had a couple of really good friends who were officers. From what I gathered, that was unusual. So, there's this newly minted commander on board. He's always been an insufferable little prick, but now that he's made CMBR, it's like his dickishness has been amplified by a factor of 10. Bad enough that the guy picks his nose at the morning reports, but now he's got his shiny new commander's hat and he is just so ducking proud of it that he wears it everywhere. He seems especially fond of wandering through the enlisted mess. For anyone unfamiliar with the military, this is pretty bad form. First, you don't wear a hat indoors, generally speaking. Second, there was no good reason for him to go through the enlisted mess. The Navy has had, this is from the late 60s, some rules about when you salute, and they can get pretty convoluted. Dad says that this guy expected everyone to stop what they were doing, eating in this case, and salute him and his shiny ducking hat. My dad is sick of the guy, but as a sonar man second class, there's not much he can really do, and who would listen to a complaint anyway? So Dad waits. It's poker night in the quarters that CMDR had shares with Dad's officer friends. CMDR hat is in his rack, sacked out. Dad walked in, nodded at the poker players, sidled over and grabbed the hated hat. One of his friends said, "We never saw you," and the other guys agreed. CMDR hat was not a well-liked individual. Dad then proceeded up on deck and pitched the hat into the Mediterranean Sea. He did it with the replacement hat, too. Next one is titled, Another Reason to Not Park Like an A-Hole. In college, a few weeks before graduation, some kid got a silver 350Z. He would straddle 2 parking spots in our garage every single day. Not crappy out-of-the-way spots where nobody would care at the good spots that everyone wanted if they were available. The car would move daily and always come back to taking up 2 of the good spots. After a week or 2 of this, I suspect security or something got a hold of him and said something about parking like a douche. After that, instead of being smack in the middle of the line, he would just be slightly over the left line, so it would be really tight to squeeze in. I talked to a few neighbors about this dude, and everyone saw it and felt the same way. He really was as obnoxious as I thought. One night I get home and see my opportunity. The guy parked next to a cement wall, and the spot to his left was just big enough that I could squeeze my car in. I had to fold in my passenger side mirror to make it. I slide in and the guy has about 6 inches of space to open his door. No way is he going to get in. He might be able to squeeze in the passenger side and climb over, but not if he's a fat dude. The wall will block that door too. I leave a note on his windshield basically saying my car is a piece of junk, so scratch it if you want, and I won't be able to tell. Don't park like a dick. I left my car there for 4 days just to make sure that he got the message. The guy did move the car the entire time. The note was gone, but I suspect he couldn't squeeze in. For the next 2 weeks until graduation, he parked at the far end of the garage that was usually pretty empty anyways. I don't think that he ever did anything to my car, but it had 200k miles on it and had been hit on the passenger side, leaving a big dent and a lot of scratches. I was shopping for a new car anyways. Another scratch wasn't going to make a difference in the value. Next one is titled, Change. One day my dad went to pay his power bill in cash like always. They tell him they no longer accept cash, and he has to write a check and send it to their P.O. box. My dad had been paying his bill there in cash for 10 years, so he started getting angry they wouldn't accept his money to pay his bill, and the desk lady was being extremely rude. The manager is called in. My dad explained the situation, and the manager turned to the desk lady telling her of course they could accept his payment. So my dad says he'll be right back. Goes to the bank to get $137.26 in unrolled pennies, puts it on the lady's desk, and stood there watching her count them so he could get a receipt. There were no further problems paying his bill. On that note, his friend won a lot at the casino and wanted to pay the rest of his truck off to the dealer that had financed it. Goes to pay in cash, but they won't accept it. Says they will only accept a check. Guy gets upset. Hits up every bank for as many nickels as he can. He fills up the back of his finance pickup truck with nickels, backs up to the door of the dealership, and quite literally starts shoveling them out onto the floor, telling the manager that this is legal tender and it must be accepted to pay his debt owed. Manager's jaw was wide open the whole time. Guy then waited as the $5,451.85 in nickels was counted so he could get his payoff receipt. I love my dad. He taught me not to let people mess with me. Last one is titled, Borderline Pedophile at Work Made Me Angry. I worked at this gas station a while back. There was an older employee who'd been there a few years. This guy was the definition of creep. He has this crap-eating grin plastered to his face all the time, except when he was shouting at customers for being ducking retarded or something, or making the female employees cry by insulting their appearance. Added to this, The guy had a bad habit of checking out the young girls from the elementary school next door. He'd even make comments if he thought he was in safe company. Who the hell is okay to say that crap to? The only reason this guy hadn't gotten fired yet was because the boss was a bit of a softie after being sued for wrongful termination. The employee had been stealing, but the video evidence was lost, and the guy threatened to make it a racial issue if he got canned. He's Jewish. I know, stupid. Anyway, one day in the winter, I come into work the evening shift to find this guy bitching at one of the girls behind the counter for no goddamn reason. Apparently, he found her sitting with her foot on the counter tying her shoe. Unacceptable. So, this guy worked our car wash, and he was coming back in the morning. The car wash had a fabric chair inside the entrance for the guy to use when it was slow. So that night after the wash was closed, when I was closing up my shift, I snuck into the car wash and peed all over the guy's chair. Like a full-on, held in for the last 2 hours, but not overly hydrated, so it's still pretty deep yellow and pungent kind of pee. I didn't work again until the following weekend. Apparently the guy sat in it, soaked the butt of his pants, flipped his crap for a few days and then quit. No one else seemed to care. Thanks for listening.